everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new Mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week, so if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. But anyway, this week we are going to be talking about the solved case of 6-year-old Ellie Butler. She was a beautiful, bubbly and smiley little girl who was tragically murdered just over 8 years ago now. And one of the worst things about this case is that a lot of people, including Ellie's grandparents, believe that her death could have been prevented. They felt as though a lot of mistakes were made when it came to Ellie's care, mistakes that they believe ultimately contributed towards her death. And we'll be talking more about that towards the end of this video. So for today's case, we are going back to the year 2013 in Sutton, which is a large town in South London in England. And this is Ellie Butler. As I said, she was 6 years old at the time that this case took place. However, her story begins on the 30th of December 2006, which is the day that she was born. Ellie's parents were named Ben Butler and Jenny Gray. They were both in their early 30s when they met. I believe Jenny was about a year older than Ben, and she worked as a graphic designer. She had a qualification in graphic design. However, she also had a huge passion for acting. Acting was what Jenny wanted to do in life. She wanted to be an actress, and she had some success with this. She attended an acting school in Sutton and actually appeared in a couple of big television shows that we have here in Britain. She had a part in a show called The Bill and also the soap EastEnders, and she didn't have huge parts in them. She wasn't like the main character or anything. I think she just had appearances in them, like she was a background character, but it was still a pretty huge deal for her, as I'm sure it would be for any aspiring actress. However, following these parts, her acting career just kind of fizzled out a little bit, which is why she decided to qualify as a graphic designer. Ben Butler, on the other hand, didn't work. He was unemployed, and I don't know the exact reason for this, but I'm guessing it might have had something to do with the fact that he had a criminal history, which would have made it hard for him to get a job. You see, Ben Butler had a number of previous criminal convictions, such as theft and robbery, and also intimidation of a witness, and for this he was sentenced to spend 3 years in prison. But they weren't the only crimes that he was sent to prison for. He had also served prison time for beating up one of his previous girlfriends who was pregnant. So he had a past of abuse and violence. Ben Butler met Jenny Gray at a party, actually at Jenny's brother's birthday party, and this was in March of 2006. They got chatting, they hit it off pretty much immediately, and they began a relationship. Well, I say relationship, but it wasn't really. They didn't make it official and call each other their boyfriend and girlfriend. It was more of a casual relationship, I think. However, things soon turned very serious when Jenny discovered that she was actually pregnant with Ben Butler's baby just 8 weeks after she and Ben had first met. Jenny ultimately decided that she was going to keep this baby. She wanted to be a mother, and in December of 2006, she gave birth to her first child, a little baby girl named Ellie May. When Ellie was first born, she lived with just her mother, Jenny. They lived in a 1-bedroom flat in Sutton because she and Ben still weren't like officially together, I don't think, at this point, but they did eventually make it official as Ellie grew older. But for the time being, when Ellie was a newborn, it was just her and her mum at home, but Ben still visited Ellie as often as he could. Sources say that he would drop by Jenny's flat to see her and his daughter every single day, and it seemed as though they were happy about Ellie's arrival. They were happy with their baby girl. However, 2 people who were particularly over the moon when Ellie was born were her grandparents. parents, Neil and Linda Gray, so they were Jenny's parents, they were completely and utterly besotted with their granddaughter. Ellie was their first grandchild, and Neil Gray said that the love they had for Ellie as soon as she was born was just overwhelming. They adored her so much, and everything seemed to be going well for the first few weeks of Ellie's life. The family seemed to be adjusting well to having a newborn in the family. But then just 6 weeks after Ellie's birth, on the 15th of February 2007, little baby Ellie was actually rushed to the hospital, the same hospital that she was born in, and this was very, very serious. Ellie was in a very bad way when she was taken to the hospital. Doctors actually determined that she had bleeding on her brain and bleeding in the eyes after sustaining some head injuries. And the cause of these head injuries, experts believed, was from being shaken. Someone had violently shaken this 6-week-old baby. So the police were contacted by the hospital that Ellie was admitted to, and so were social services. They were obviously informed, and they soon discovered that the person who was looking after Ellie on the evening that she suffered these injuries and was rushed to the hospital was her father, Ben Butler. He was the only one looking after her that day. Ben told the police that he took Ellie to the hospital because he just suddenly noticed that she was pale and just very lethargic and almost lifeless in a way. He said that one minute she was fine and the next she just kind of slumped, and so he took her to the hospital for treatment, and he swore that he hadn't done anything to her Ellie. He claimed that she must have just had some kind of accident. However, the police quickly realised that this didn't actually seem to be an isolated incident. You see, according to sources, just a week before this, a week before Ellie was taken to the hospital because she had bleeding on the brain, Ellie was in hospital again. The first time she was taken to the hospital, she had some burn injuries. She had burns on her tiny little fingers and burns on her forehead. And once again, at the time that she sustained these injuries, she was being looked after by just her father, Ben Butler, because I believe Jenny would have been at work at the time, because if you remember, Ben didn't work. So Ben took his daughter to the hospital for treatment for these burns, and he told Ellie's doctor that this had happened because he put her right next to a radiator to keep warm. He put a 6-week-old baby right next to a hot radiator, and he said that at some point she must have rolled onto it, and the doctor believed him. The doctor knew that Ben Butler was new at this. He was a new father. Ellie was his first child, and he believed that this was just an innocent accident, and so he decided not to take this any further. He didn't contact social services or anything, even though this was neglect, whether it was an accident or not. Putting a baby next to a hot radiator so close that they're able to roll onto it and then just not watching them is neglectful. But anyway, no further action was taken. However, just a week later, as we know, Ellie was in the hospital again, this time with very severe head injuries, and she was close to death. Thankfully, after a couple of days, Ellie was making progress. She was getting better. But of course, this was still taken very seriously by the police because, as I said, doctors believed that the cause of Ellie's injuries was from being violently shaken. So obviously the police were incredibly suspicious of Ellie's father, Ben Butler, since he was the only one with her at the time of the incident. And so he was arrested. He was arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm, and social services stepped in and they took baby Ellie and placed her in foster care. She was taken away from her mother, Jenny, who was reportedly heartbroken about this, as were her parents. So Ellie's grandparents, Neil and Linda Gray, they were absolutely devastated, but all three of them were determined to see Ellie as much as they possibly could. They visited Ellie as often as possible, but of course these visits all had to be supervised by someone from social services due to what had happened. And in the meantime, the police's investigation investigation into Ellie's injuries was still underway, and eventually her father, Ben Butler, was charged and convicted of the GBH of his own baby daughter, and for this he was sent to prison for 19 months. But despite his conviction, not only was Ben Butler still protesting his innocence, but so was Ellie's mother, Jenny Gray. She just outright refused to believe that Ben was responsible for the injuries that Ellie sustained, even though she knew that he was the only one looking after Ellie at the time that it happened. And so because of this, because Jenny decided to believe and stand by Ben, she was not given back custody of her baby daughter. And so instead, social services decided that for the time being, Ellie would be looked after by her grandparents, Neil and Linda Gray. They would have temporary custody of her. Of course, this was a huge life adjustment for Neil and Linda, having a little baby to look after. They kind of felt like they were first-time parents all over again, because they hadn't cared for someone so young and little in so long, in so many years, because obviously their children, Jenny and her brother, were grown up, they were adults. And at this point, they were in like their early 60s, so Neil and Linda were pretty nervous about this new chapter in their lives, but at the same time, they wouldn't have wanted it any other way. They were just so delighted to have Ellie back. She meant the absolute world to them. Ellie was doing really well. She was really well looked after by Neil and Linda, and as the months went by and as Ellie grew older, the authorities and care agencies could see how amazingly Ellie was doing in her grandparents' care. And so in August of 2008, when Ellie was around a year and 8 months old, the family court awarded Neil and Linda special guardianship of Ellie. So that meant that they were going to be Ellie's primary carers on a long-term basis, which they were just absolutely thrilled about. Ellie just brought so much joy to their lives with her vibrant and cheeky little personality. And Neil and Linda just thought that this was it for them. They thought that they would look after Ellie until she was an adult, and they were so looking forward to the future. They were really looking forward to seeing Ellie grow up and witnessing her little milestones and achievements in life. They were just such a happy little family unit. However, this happiness was short-lived when Ben Butler was eventually released from prison in October of 2009. He was actually released early, I believe, and given leave because he decided that he was going to appeal against his conviction for GBH, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But when he was let out, he and Jenny were granted supervised visits to see their daughter Ellie, and these visits were all like pre-planned and pre-scheduled to happen, I believe, on a weekly basis. Ben and Jenny were given certain days and times that they could come and see their daughter. However, Neil Gray actually says that they very rarely attended these supervised visits. Like 70% of the time, they just wouldn't show up. In fact, they were kind of only willing to see Ellie when it suited them. They wouldn't really go out of their way to see her. It was only when it suited them. Especially Ben Butler. I mean, he would literally ring Ellie's grandparents at like 7 p.m. or later some nights saying, "I want to see Ellie now." And they would of course say no, because, well, number one, the visits that he had to be supervised, and number two, Ellie was literally asleep in bed whenever he wanted to see her. So obviously they weren't going to just wake her up when she was settled for the night. And even though he would rarely turn up to these supervised visits, they apparently weren't enough for Ben Butler. He wanted his daughter back in his care full time. He wanted full custody of her, and he wanted to clear his name as a child abuser. And so to do this, he decided to appeal his conviction for GBH. He did not want it on his record that he was criminally responsible for the injuries that Ellie sustained when she was a 6-week-old baby. And his now partner, Jenny Gray, Ellie's mother, was going to help him do this. She was going to help him with his appeal. And to help, she would write letters to the authorities saying that Ben was innocent, that he was an incredible father. She would write to the media, saying that this case of child abuse was a huge miscarriage of justice, she would contact anyone and everyone that she thought could possibly help overturn her boyfriend's conviction in some way. And unbelievably, it worked. In June of 2010, Ben Butler's conviction for GBH was quashed. So in the eyes of the law, he was no longer at fault for the injuries that Ellie sustained when she was a baby. So now that his name had been cleared, Ben Butler set out to get Ellie back, to regain full custody alongside his partner Jenny. They actually started this big public campaign to try and get custody. So once again, they were going to the media to try and get as much publicity on their case as possible. Jenny would film videos of Ben playing with Ellie during their visits and their days out with her. She filmed them playing football, she filmed them playing in the arcade. At this point, Ellie was probably around 5 years old. And yeah, they would then share these videos as part of their big media campaign, trying to make Ben look like he was this loving and caring father who loved playing with his daughter. This father who had been wronged by the authorities and who desperately wanted his daughter back. They wanted people to feel sorry for them. They wanted to be seen as these poor parents who had had their baby cruelly taken away from them for no reason. And Ben and Jenny even started making accusations that Jenny's parents, Neil and Linda Gray, weren't taking proper care of Ellie. Neil said that they were accused of not feeding Ellie in the right way, feeding her the right foods. Butler said that they weren't dressing Ellie in the right way or buying her the right clothes. I think he said at one point that they never treated Ellie or took her on holiday or anything like that, which was just a complete lie. He was just making all of this stuff up because he wanted to make Neil and Linda look like bad grandparents, bad carers, so that hopefully Ellie would be given back to him and Jenny. But Neil and Linda were determined to do everything in their power to stop that from happening, because they knew the risk. They knew that if Ellie went back to live with her father, that she would not be safe. And so they actually decided to use their life savings to fight Ben and Jenny in court. Ben and Jenny had actually been given legal aid for the custody battle to help with their court fees, whereas Neil and Linda had to use their savings. All of the money that they had been saving for years and years and years, money that was probably for their retirement or something, they were now using to pay legal fees to try and protect their granddaughter Ellie, and also another grandchild, I believe. I haven't actually mentioned this yet, but when Ben Butler was in prison, Jenny actually gave birth to a second child who was also fathered by Ben Butler. And this child was also taken away from the parents, Ben and Jenny, just like Ellie had been. And I'm not entirely sure where this child was placed. There really isn't much information about Ellie's younger sibling online for obvious reasons. And yeah, I'm not sure where they were living. I believe they were probably in foster care. I don't think they were living with Neil and Linda Gray, but I could be wrong on that. But regardless, Ben and Jenny were also fighting to get full custody of their second child as well as Ellie. And in October of 2012, Ellie's fate was about to be decided. A court hearing was being held to determine what was going to happen to Ellie, who at this point was just a couple of weeks away from her 6th birthday. Now, very, very unfortunately, by the time the court hearing came around, Neil and Linda Gray were really, really struggling for money. They had used up all of their savings in legal fees. They had spent just under £80,000 trying to fight Ben Butler and Jenny Gray and maintain full custody of their granddaughter. But by October of 2012, they had used up all of their money. They didn't have any more savings to use to fight this. And so when it came to the court hearing, they couldn't afford a lawyer, so they had no representation, whereas Ben Butler and Jenny Gray did. And so at the end of the hearing, the judge, Lady Justice Hogg, came to the decision that Neil and Linda Gray's special guardianship of their granddaughter Ellie would be revoked and that Ellie would be sent back to live with her parents, Ben Butler and Jenny Gray, who are honestly pretty much like strangers to Ellie. Yes, Ellie had spent a couple of days with them, a couple of hours with them here and there, but as I mentioned earlier on, most of the time when Jenny and Ben were scheduled to see Ellie on one of the supervised visits, they would just not bother turning up. Neil and Linda would wait with Ellie for hours and hours for her parents to arrive, and they just wouldn't, which is obviously something that they didn't show in their media campaign conveniently. Ellie had spent pretty much her whole life living with her grandparents. That was basically all she knew. And now she was being taken away from that safe environment where she felt comfortable, and she was being sent to live with her parents. And as I'm sure you can imagine, Neil and Linda Gray were absolutely devastated with this decision. Neil Gray actually said to Lady Justice Hogg, the judge who decided on the ruling, he said to her, well, I hope you have a conscience, because one day you might find that you have blood on your hands in regards to our granddaughter Ellie. About a week after this court hearing, something really bizarre happened in this case, and that was that Ben Butler and Jenny Gray actually went on ITV's This Morning. Now, if you're not from the UK, you probably won't know what This Morning is. It's basically a British daytime television show. It's a very, very big and popular show that we have here. They have millions of viewers. And yeah, in October of 2012, Ben and Jenny were invited on it on This Morning after all of the publicity that their media campaign had received. They were basically being interviewed on the show about their media campaign and their legal battle to get their daughter Ellie back. Again, they're trying to portray themselves as these poor parents who had their child taken away from them unfairly. Ben's portraying himself as this innocent victim who had gone through so much and had been wrongly accused of harming his daughter, and people believed him. The interviewers, Ruth Langsford and Eamon Holmes, believed him. The audience believed him, and they all felt sorry for him, for Ben and Jenny, which is exactly what they wanted. On the 9th of November 2012, 6-year-old Ellie Butler was sent back to live with her mother and father, Ben and Jenny, as was her younger sibling. They also regained full custody of their second child. And to everyone on the outside, they appear to be this happy little reunited family of 4. But of course no one could see what was going on behind closed doors. In the aftermath of this whole case, a video surfaced, a video that was recorded inside of the Butler family home. It's believed that this video was filmed by Jenny Gray. Whether she filmed it on purpose or by accident, we don't know, but she recorded a video where Ben Butler is shouting at Ellie. I say shouting, but honestly, it was more like screaming. He was screaming in her face. He was swearing at her in this video, swearing at his 6-year-old daughter, and the whole time, Ellie was just kind of standing there and she was frozen.
So I'm good, don't ask me to do something, which you ain't done, and then sort it out. Off.
She wasn't responding to him, she wasn't crying or getting upset, which suggests to me that she was probably used to this kind of treatment. Because if an adult is shouting and screaming in their face, most young children would obviously be in tears. But Ellie wasn't, indicating that this probably wasn't the first time that this happened. And at one point in the video, the camera was actually on Ellie's face, and it's then when you can see that Ellie had a black eye, suggesting that she had recently been hit or punched in the face, and we can probably guess who did that to her. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, this video didn't surface until after this whole case, by which point it was too late. Despite living with her parents, Ellie still had contact with her grandparents, Neil and Linda Gray. It obviously wasn't as often as they would have liked, but they still saw her occasionally, whenever Jenny and Ben would allow them to see her anyway. And on the 27th of October 2013, Neil and Linda had arranged to meet Ellie and Jenny at a McDonald's in Sutton. And of course, they were so excited. They were really looking forward to seeing seeing their granddaughter because they hadn't seen her in, I think, about 6 weeks by this point. They even brought with them some sweeties and some cakes for Ellie. They brought her like a little bag of treats. However, when Ellie walked into the McDonald's with her mother and Neil and Linda laid eyes on her, they were really shocked and concerned. They were quite concerned about how Ellie looked. She was wearing very creased up and I think dirty clothes. She was wearing odd shoes. Her hair was very messy. It looked as though no one had brushed it in ages. She just looked very different. Neil and Linda felt like she looked as though she wasn't being looked after properly. But Jenny and Ellie only stayed for about 20 minutes in McDonald's with Neil and Linda. After a short while, Jenny just said that they had to go, so they gathered their things and off they went. Before they left, Neil and Linda told Ellie that they loved her. Ellie said it back, and as Ellie was walking out the door, she waved goodbye to her grandparents. And that would be the last goodbye that she ever said to them. That was the last time Neil and Linda ever saw their granddaughter alive. Just the next day, so the 28th of October 2013 at 2:46 p.m, Ben Butler and Jenny Gray picked up the phone and they rang 999. They were both just completely distraught and frantic on this phone call, and they were basically screaming to the operator that their daughter Ellie was not breathing. They said that her colour had gone, she'd gone blue, and she wasn't moving, and they needed an ambulance immediately. So paramedics were sent to the home straight away, and they rushed Ellie to the nearest hospital, where doctors tried desperately hard to save her life. But sadly, it was too late. She was already gone. There was nothing they could do. And at 4:01 p.m, Ellie Butler was officially pronounced dead at just 6 years old. After she was pronounced dead, a police officer was sent to her grandparents' house to inform them of her passing. And as soon as the officer said to Neil and Linda Gray that they had some bad news, Neil says that Linda just jumped up and she said, "It's not Ellie, is it?" And the officer had to respond saying, "Yes, it is. I'm afraid she's died." And I don't really think that there are any words to describe the pain that they felt when they were told that news. I watched a documentary about this case whilst I was researching it, and in it you hear a lot from Ellie's grandfather, Neil Gray, and watching him talk about what happened to Ellie is heart-wrenching. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. It literally hurts to watch because you can just see how painful all of this was for him and for his wife Linda. Is awful. And as soon as they were told the news, they knew exactly what happened. They knew that her death wouldn't have just been an accident. They knew that Ellie's parents, Ben and Jenny, must have been responsible. And they knew this because this was exactly what they had been warning everyone. They told the police, they told social services, they told the court that if Ellie was sent back to live with her parents, something would happen to her because she was not safe with them. They were not capable of looking after her, but no one listened to them. In Ellie's autopsy, it was determined that her cause of death was, quote, catastrophic skull and brain injury from where she had very clearly been beaten. This 6-year-old girl was beaten to death, and the person looking after her at the time of her murder, her father, Ben Butler. Ben was immediately arrested on suspicion of murder and he was taken to the police station for questioning. But of course, he did not tell the truth. The detectives were desperately trying to figure out exactly what had happened. They were asking him, was Ellie struck with an object? Did you hit her with an object? Was she thrown against the wall? What did you do to her? But he just denied everything. He actually said, quote, "You think I could do that? No, I can't." Which I think is quite interesting, his choice of words. He didn't say, "No, I didn't do that." He said, "No, I couldn't have done that." And then following this, he just started replying with no comment to most of the questions that he was asked. His partner, Jenny Gray, was also brought in for questioning. I don't believe she was arrested for anything at this point. I think she was just brought to the station to be interviewed. And in her questioning, she stuck by her boyfriend, Ben, as she had always done. Despite the fact that her daughter was now dead and it was clearly obvious that Ben was responsible, she still protested his innocence. She said, and I quote, "I don't know what's happened here, and all I can say to you is I don't believe Ben done that. I don't believe Ben's done anything to her, and the reason I don't believe that is I've got no reason to think that." She doesn't have any reason to think that, even though he had previously been convicted of grievous bodily harm of Ellie. Police also noticed in Jenny's interview that she never actually said Ellie's name, not even once. Anytime she referred to Ellie, she would just say her or she. It was like she couldn't bring herself to say Ellie's name. And in addition to that, they also noticed that Jenny never used the tissue that was in her hands. While she was being interviewed, she was given a tissue because she appeared to be crying and sobbing, but the tissue was dry. She never used it, indicating that these may have been crocodile tears. It was clear that Ben and Jenny were sticking together in this. They were both going to deny everything. However, when the police did a bit of digging into the day of Ellie's death, and even beforehand, when they did a bit of digging into this couple's life, they quickly discovered the truth. One of the things they found actually was that Ben Butler was not just horrible and abusive towards his children, but also towards his girlfriend, the mother of his children, Jenny. They obviously obtained a search warrant for the family's home, and during the search, they came across some of Jenny Gray's diaries, and in these diaries she had talked about all of the abuse that she had suffered at the hands of her boyfriend Ben. He was both physically and mentally abusive to her. I think she would write about the abuse in these diaries as if she was talking to Ben himself, almost like she was writing him a letter. She wrote things like, quote, "I put you before everything. Stop being angry and hateful and violent. I feel like you hate me and it hurts so much." When the police looked through Ben and Jenny's mobile phone and their phone records, they also discovered a lot of just vile text messages that Ben had sent to Jenny in the months before Ellie's murder. Jenny would send Ben text messages saying things like, quote, "I love you and want you. I never want to lose you." In another text message, she said, quote, "Just so you know, I am obsessed and in awe of you. Think you are so hit," I think that's meant to say hot, "and want you to fancy me the same. I would die for you." Which was honestly a huge contrast to the kind of text that he would send her. He would send her messages where he called her ugly, he would call her a dog, he would call her a bitch and tell her to F off. He was just vile to her, and I mean, if he can be that vile over text message, I dread to think what he was like in real life. The police also discovered through their internet search history that Jenny had Googled things like magic spells to make him love me again and urgent spell to make him be sorry for hurting me. She also Googled, "I'm with a bully who beats me and tells me I'm ugly and fat and hurts me all the time." So it's obvious that Ben was also incredibly abusive towards Jenny as well. But despite all of this abuse, she was still so obsessed with this man and she stood by him through everything. She was very easily manipulated by Ben Butler. He had this control and power over her and he could convince her to do anything, even, it seems, lie for him when it came to their own daughter's murder. Jenny was still willing to lie and stand by the man that had killed her child. Now, as I said before in his questioning, Ben Butler was denying everything. He said that he didn't do anything to Ellie. He was not responsible for her injuries, and he claimed that her death was an accident. Ben's story was that on the afternoon of October the 28th, 2013, Ellie was watching a Peppa Pig cartoon, and in it, Peppa Pig was jumping on the bed. And so Ellie decided that she wanted to do the same. She wanted to copy Peppa Pig, and she started jumping on the bed as well. And Ben said that whilst Ellie was jumping, she fell off the bed and hit her head, and that was how she sustained her head injuries and how she died. However, the pathologist that conducted the autopsy on Ellie strongly disagreed with that. They did not believe that her death, her extensive head injuries, were the result of an accident, of her just falling off the bed. Ellie's injuries were just so severe, in fact, that half of her skull was just completely crushed, and experts said that her injuries were consistent with injuries that you would see from people that had been in a high-speed car crash. And another expert said that they believed that the trauma to Ellie's head suggested that she had been hit in the head with a lot of force at least twice. At the very least, she had been hit 2 times with some kind of heavy object. So this was clearly not an accident. She could not have sustained the injuries that she did by just falling off the bed. The police strongly believed that Ben Butler did this to Ellie. He beat his daughter in a fit of rage, just like he had done many times before. Only this time he took it a step further. This time he beat her so severely that she died because of it. And soon enough, they found even more evidence to back this up. Firstly, it was determined in Ellie's post-mortem that she had been dead for at least 2 hours before she was rushed to the hospital and before that 999 call was made, which I think already tells us all we need to know. If this really was an accident, if she just fell off the bed and hit her head, why didn't Ben Butler phone emergency services straight away? It just doesn't make sense. What was he doing in those 2 hours before the paramedics arrived at the scene? Well, the police soon worked that out when they did a bit of digging into Jenny Gray's movements from that afternoon. You see, Jenny Gray was actually at work on the day of Ellie's death. However, Ben Butler rang her around midday and he told her to come home immediately. So Jenny left her work and she was actually caught on CCTV literally running down the road and flagging down a taxi. So she was clearly in a rush to get home after Ben's phone call. The driver of the taxi that Jenny got into that day said that when Jenny got into his car, she said to him something along the lines of, "My child is very ill, I need you to drive me home quickly, I need you to drive me to Sutton," which is obviously where she lived. And the driver also said that at one point during the journey, Jenny's phone rang. It was her partner, Ben Butler, and the driver overheard her saying in a very shocked voice, "You've done what?" Jenny arrived home shortly after this, and it's believed that once she did, she found Ellie already dead after Ben had beaten her, and so the two of them decided to cover it up. They cleaned up the scene. It was actually found that Jenny Gray put some washing on. I believe she put the clothes that Ben was wearing in the washing machine and also her top because they both had Ellie's blood on. The police also discovered that Ben took the dog for a walk after he killed Ellie, and during this dog walk he took some of Jenny's diaries and he ripped the pages up and disposed of them in the bin outside of their home because he knew that in these diaries she had talked about how violent and abusive he was, so he wanted to get rid of them. But of course the police later found them and pieced them back together and they read everything. And then when they were ready, when Ben and Jenny felt like they had gotten rid of all of the evidence, they called 999 and told the operator that their daughter was not breathing properly and that she needed an ambulance, when in reality Ellie had been dead for a couple of hours by this point, so they knew that she was beyond saving. but this was all just a part of their act. During the 999 call, they even did CPR on Ellie's body. They were being instructed by the operator to do CPR, but they knew that it wouldn't work. They tried desperately hard to make it look like Ellie's death was an accident, but it didn't work. The police had a substantial amount of evidence against them both. They had the results of Ellie's post-mortem, they had the diaries, they had the CCTV footage of Jenny running home or running to a taxi from work hours before the 999 call. They had the knowledge of Ben's history of abuse and violence towards Ellie. They had so much to say that Ben murdered his daughter and that Jenny helped him to cover up the crime, and so they were both charged. Ben Butler was charged with murder and Jenny Gray was charged with child cruelty and perverting the course of justice. Just as a side note, I believe the main reason she was charged with child cruelty was because another thing that was found in Ellie's autopsy is that she had actually fractured her shoulder about a month before her death, and we can probably guess how that happened. It was probably caused by her father's violence. However, neither Ben or Jenny took Ellie to the hospital for this injury, even though it would have been so painful. They just let their 6-year-old suffer. Ben Butler pleaded not guilty to his charge. Despite all of the evidence, he was still sticking to his story that Ellie's death was an accident. She was just jumping on the bed when she accidentally fell and hit her head. But of course, the jury did not believe him, and so on the 21st of June 2016, he was found guilty of murder and also guilty of child cruelty. And for this, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 23 years. Jenny Gray was also found guilty of her charges, and for her part in Ellie's death, she was sentenced to 42 months in prison, which a lot of people were very, very angry about, the fact that she was only sentenced to 42 months. That seems incredibly low for what she did. And even her father, Neil Gray, agrees. He believes that both his daughter Jenny and Ben Butler should have been given longer sentences. I believe Jenny Gray is out of prison now. She is a free woman, although her father Neil doesn't have anything to do with her. He cut off all contact with her after what she and Ben did to his granddaughter. He disowned her. Neil's wife, Linda Gray, has very sadly since passed away. She actually passed away on the first day of Ben and Jenny's trial, which was the 19th of April 2016. Linda had cancer. She had had cancer for a long time, and unfortunately it killed her before she could even see the outcome of the trials, before she could even see justice for her granddaughter. And I can't even begin to comprehend how hard this must have been for Neil. He had already lost his granddaughter in such a horrific way, and then he lost his wife as well. He lost his wife who he'd been married to for 45 years. He lost the two most important and most special people in his life, and then he had to go through these trials pretty much on his own. His wife had always been there with him through all of this, and now she was gone. In the aftermath of this whole case, Neil Gray actually sought out to get some justice and answers from the authorities, because he felt as though his granddaughter Ellie was not just failed by her parents, but also the authorities, like social services and the judge, Lady Justice Hogg, who was the one that ordered Ellie be sent back to live with her parents less than a year before her death. Because I've said it throughout this video, but Neil and Linda Gray told everyone that Ellie was not safe with her parents. If you remember from earlier, Neil even said to Lady Justice Hogg, "You might have Ellie's blood on your hands one day for deciding to send her back to live with Ben Butler." But their warnings were ignored. No one listened to them, and no one listened to Ellie. No one cared what Ellie wanted, whether she actually wanted to be taken away from her grandparents and sent back to live with her parents. That decision was taken away from her, and taken away from the people who cared about her more than anyone in the world, her grandparents. Neil Gray just wanted more to be done so that this would never happen again, so that no other child would have to suffer the way that Ellie did, and he felt like the authorities had to do more. But as well as that, he just wanted an apology. He wanted the authorities and social services to just acknowledge the fact that mistakes were made on their part, mistakes that subsequently led to Ellie's death. In particular, he wanted an apology from Lady Justice Hogg, because ultimately she was the one who decided that Ellie should be sent back to Ben Butler and Jenny Gray in November of 2012, and he wanted her to apologise for that mistake. He actually wrote a letter to the judge in which he said, quote, "Dear Justice Hogg, to say that Ellie's death has caused complete and utter devastation to us is an understatement. Ellie was our shining light. She was a beautiful, bubbly, intelligent little girl who always had a smile on her face. It would be helpful if you could acknowledge our family pain and anguish, to support the need for an inquiry, and simply say sorry." But from what I can gather, Neil Gray never got this apology from Lady Justice Hogg. She never said sorry. Now, there was an inquest into Ellie's death in 2018 to determine whether or not the failings made by agencies like social services and authorities did contribute towards her death. However, it was ultimately concluded by Coroner Dame Linda Dobbs that they didn't. She did not believe, based on the evidence, that the mistakes made by the authorities contributed towards Ellie's murder, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, Neil Gray was hugely disappointed with. He was so heartbroken that the care system and the family court were not going to be held accountable for the mistakes that they made when it came to Ellie's care, because he believes that if those mistakes hadn't been made, if Ben Butler and Jenny Gray had not been granted custody of Ellie, then she would still be alive today. I'm not sure if Neil Gray is still trying to fight for justice today in terms of the authorities and agencies. He has said that he would like the law to change in how cases similar to Ellie's are handled. And he also said in an interview a few years ago that he would really like a charity set up, I think in Ellie's name, as like a legacy for her. And he wants this charity to provide support for other young people and children who may be victims of abuse in the home, just like Ellie was. I'm actually unsure if such a charity has been set up by Neil yet. That might be something that he is still working on today. I don't know. If I do hear of anything in regards to that, I will of course let you guys know so that you can show your support. But yeah, that is it for this case. That is the heartbreaking case of 6-year-old Ellie Butler. A very, very difficult case to cover. I think one of the hardest cases that I've ever talked about. I actually had to refilm the second half of this video because I was just such a mess when I was filming it the first time. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Ellie's story. If there are any cases similar to Ellie's that you think need to be talked about, please do let me know in the comments, because as devastating as these kinds of cases are, I do think that they are incredibly important to talk about and spread awareness about. So let me know if you have any suggestions. Please do give this video a thumbs up to show your support of my channel, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!